right, good afternoon, everyone. I couldn't see everybody on the screen. This is John Elsesser. I'm the executive director here at IMPEA, and as I scanned the registration list, there were a lot of familiar names on there, and some that maybe not so familiar. But one of the things we've been doing here at IMPEA, kind of in response to COVID, because we had to postpone our large conference, which we do at the convention center. We shifted gears and have been trying to provide what we call our PD Thursdays. And we've reached out to a variety of our business partners who have been wonderful and coming to the forefront and providing some great quality professional development, timely kinds of things that have been helpful to our teachers and our administrators. And that's the same thing we're looking forward to today. Ivy Tech is one of our business partners, and it's one of the business partners that I'm really most excited about because I see all kinds of potential opportunities between our schools and our jurisdictions with Ivy Tech. I've gotten to know Dr. Rebecca Rayscholde, who's VP for K-14 initiatives over the last couple of years, and even her predecessor, who's now the Secretary of Education for the state of Indiana, Dr. Katie Jenner. So we have lots of strong relationships there. And, I guess I'm going to start because I don't want to talk too long, but it would have been great if we did this same presentation a year ago, prior to everybody being shut down through COVID. And I'm hearing some echo, Heidi. I don't know if that's coming from my computer somewhere, but because when we start talking about things like curriculum rigor, student engagement, and just general best practices in virtual instruction, that would have been wonderful to have last March. We were thrown into a different environment. God bless our folks because we really stepped up very quickly. Most of our schools are back in person now, but I'm a big believer that there's going to be some silver linings that came out of the pandemic that will live on beyond. And I'm sure the role of virtual instruction will change, I think, to some degree as well. So I'm real happy to have, as you can see on the screen with us, Sean Pennington, who is a project director for K-14 initiatives. Sean just moved in from the Department of Ed. Justin Damir, who has a history in one of our member schools. Justin's executive director of educational technology. He was at Guerin Catholic before going to Ivy Tech. And Ashley Calder, who's the instructional designer at Ivy Tech. And she's also has charter school experience coming from Heron High School. So that's enough blabbering on my part, and I'm going to turn it over to the experts. And I know we have some of our local experts that are going to be involved as well, and looking forward to hearing that. So welcome, folks. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks, Mr. Elsesser. Just to give you a webinar agenda, got about an hour. We're going to try to be respectful of everyone's time on a Thursday afternoon. So we're going to run through, like to just discuss and openly share our mission of the K-14 team here at the college. Then I will turn it over to Justin and Ashley, our content experts, and they're going to talk about a few different areas of virtual instruction that are very pertinent to being successful. And then I will discuss some gear projects that would be relative for you to hear about that are related to professional development for virtual instruction, but then also some student readiness and remediation, a platform that we have that could also be useful when related to virtual instruction. And then we have an expert practitioner panel from partner schools from around the state. We'll try to spend about 20 minutes on each one of those areas. See if I can get this out of the, here we go. Okay. So our K-14 vision for the future, our Office of K-14 initiatives here at the college, we would like to prepare all students for post-secondary success by providing academic opportunities through Indiana's largest dual credit program, which is us here at Ivy Tech. We impact about 60,000. We have over 60,000 dual credit students, by far the largest provider in the state. And our vision is to partner with all K-12 schools and try to provide that equity of accessibility for all high school students to earn credentials to attain either their college, career, and ultimately their life goals. We like to pride ourselves on being student-centered. We provide value to students and parents. Dual credit attendance is of no cost to students to attend Ivy Tech. Again, equity and accessibility is very important values for us here at the college. And we just like to provide that open choice and always to operate with excellence. So now I will turn over to Justin and Ashley.
That was so quick. Hi, everybody. My name is Ashley Coulter. I think John had said before, but I had taught at Heron High School for a few years, was a curriculum specialist, and then also at Manual High School on the South Side. So happy to be here with you today. I know that you are all in education, so I certainly don't want to preach or pretend like you don't already know some of these things, but I hope that I can bring a little bit of a fresh perspective here, and I hope you get something out of it. So rigor is quite the buzzword. And I think that specifically in the virtual kind of world that we were in, there was like two notions for me. There was the notion of, oh my gosh, this is not going to be a rigorous situation. Like they're going to be at home, even, you know, whether they were at home full-time or part-time, and they're going to be in their pajamas and they might be watching TV in the background, and like this is not going to be able, we're not going to be able to get to a rigorous education with them spending time at home. And then there was another notion of, oh my gosh, they're going to have to do a lot independently, and to do that is pretty rigorous. It's like really difficult, and so I'm interested in kind of those two things. But I think that before we can make that decision, whether it was rigorous or not, whether it is rigorous or not, we just have to make the clarification. And I know that you probably have known this before, but that rigorous does not mean difficult. It does not mean a lot. It does not mean tricky or a ton of work piling on them. I was a literature teacher, and I certainly thought at some time rigorous meant assigning Tale of Two Cities at the same time as Beowulf, and that just didn't work out, right? Because that's not rigor. They went through, and it was a very surface level reading. So it certainly isn't more, and it's certainly not, let's make it really difficult, like that first picture there. But what it is kind of a shift in perspective from that to really challenging, not necessarily hard, but you're consistently challenging the student to think creatively and to think independently in really innovative ways. And I think personally, to get to rigor, you have to engage the student. So you have to have their personal investment in order for you to actually go to a rigorous place. And so once they're personally invested, once they feel like they have creativity, hey, I'm in my pajamas, but I'm in my room, and I have all these thoughts going through my head, and I can really get down to something interesting, then you create like depth. And I think they are able to go through the depth themselves once they have investment. So there's a couple ways to do that, right? One, I think we all have to maintain high expectations. I don't know whether you are still doing virtual, still doing half-halves, doing full day, but virtually, I think especially we have to say students will rise to our expectations always. I truly believe that. And so whether it's from afar or close up, there's no reason why they can't meet those same expectations. So that mindset's important. Like I just said, quality over quantity. We have a ton of standards to cover, all of us, and we teach all of them and hope that they master all of them. But I think we can appreciate that some are just more crucial than others. And so for me, I really identified like 8 what I called power standards, which were big, difficult, like packed standards that we needed to practice again and again and again in order to ensure mastery. And so I think having those in mind, those big important ones, is something that will help you kind of reach that rigor. It's going to take a lot of extra support. So scaffolding and formative assessment, which we'll talk about here in a second. And then I feel like student choice, allowing them freedom, a lot of times does not equate rigor. We think rigor is like we have to point them in a very specific direction to go really deep. And I think it's actually the opposite of that. I think if we allow a lot of choice for students, they are able then to have ownership, and they're willing to go much deeper into a skill or a topic or what have you. So I think choice is important as well. Thank you. And then the last thing I just want to say is I think the key, if there were like a secret ingredient that I would say really helps with rigor, it's relevance. And so what I think is that if you make it relevant for students, if you make it important, they see the importance in it, then it's easily made rigorous because of that same idea of the student choice, right? If they feel this is important, okay, now I've learned this skill, I've learned this topic, now we're going to do something a little bigger, we're going to do something a little more innovative. It requires my brain, not just other people's brain. They can come to the same conclusion, but this is going to require my brain, something that I'm invested in and is relevant to my life and to our culture and to current events. They are much more willing really to go really deep into that and achieve much higher rigor. So this is a kind of a well-known research little graph here, and we won't go through all this, but you can see kind of that it takes a little bit of both, right? As we go up in taxonomy, we also can go across in relevance or application. I'm gonna do it in this discipline, or I can apply it in different disciplines or across many, now real world applications, now unpredictable future applications. And so as we get to those relevant things, I think the rigor also increases. So I think relevance is important as well.
So Ashley's going to come back in a little bit and talk more because she's really, really good at what she does. And so I'm fortunate that we're able to have here today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Justin Daymeyer. I'm the Executive Director, Educational Technology here at Ivy Tech. And as John alluded to earlier, I came from K-12 education prior to coming to Ivy Tech about a year ago. So I think one of the other aspects of good virtual instruction is engagement. And really, and I'm going to preface all of this by saying I truly believe that good teaching is good teaching is good teaching. The modality in which we're teaching in isn't so as important as those of us who are in the trenches, in the classroom, and virtually in front of our students, interacting with them, right? So I think it's very easy for all of us who are classroom teachers, and I've still spent more time in the classroom as a classroom teacher than I have doing what I'm doing now, or being a technology director or anything else. So I think we all know very clearly what is engagement in a face-to-face classroom, right? Any one of us can walk into a classroom and we can tell if our students are engaged with each other. We can tell if our students are engaged with the content that we're presenting, and we can tell if the students are engaged with us, right? So I think that that's really, really easy. I think it's harder for teachers to understand what does that look like virtually, right? So even, and I'll preface this, when we talk about virtual instruction at Ivy Tech, we talk about synchronous class sessions, right? So if I am there with my students at the same time via Zoom like we are now, for us, that's virtual. Then there's also the online, when we are not with our students at all and we are asynchronous, right? And then that engagement looks entirely different. So depending on where all of you are coming from and what stage of the COVID reaction we're all in, you may be back to face-to-face, you may be doing a hybrid, which you're virtual with your students sometime and not other times. So we have a lot of different things that are happening here, but I will just say that when we talk about engagement, and I'm going to talk about engagement with what I mean in a virtual setting like what we're doing now, and then also in an online only setting. So if you're having your students doing activities not with you and asynchronously and not with each other, right? So active learning is way more in a virtual space or online space than simply clicking links and buttons and watching lectures in video, right? I can sit back and watch a YouTube video, but that is not necessarily engaging, right? I can learn a lot from it, but I'm not necessarily engaging with the content in the same way, right? If I'm clicking around a course, just because I'm clicking from one piece of content to another doesn't mean I'm necessarily actively engaged in that content. No more so than if I just sit back and read a book, right? Am I really engaging truly in understanding that and applying that and doing other things with that type of information? So when we start to talk about active learning in this space, we've got some information here from D. Fink in 2005, who talks about what it really means to be doing that. And I think we've got a really good framework for what we're talking about, right? So we're doing and observing, right? And we're using information ideas, and then we have some dialogue and reflection about that. And where those three pieces intersect really is kind of the sweet spot that we're looking for when it comes to engagement, right? So what am I doing with learning activities that require those students to actively do something thoughtful with the concepts in my course? And then Ashley's going to talk later about what are the tools that can allow me to do that electronically, right? And so what are the tools that I can use via a Zoom meeting or Google Hangouts or whatever it is that we're using? I've got tools that can allow my students to engage with that content and with me and with each other and have that type of reflection, that conversation, that dialogue, right? And so we can really then talk about a rich learning experience that surrounds that, right? So it's an activity that aligns with learning outcomes, the assessments that we want to be able to do. And we can allow those students to learn new concepts and skills, and then we can allow them to practice even virtually. And it can be really, really rigorous. It can add to that depth of learning that Ashley was talking about earlier. And then we really can go from there. And hands-on activities, even outside of the classroom, are certainly possible, whether they're doing that individually, whether they're collaborating at a distance, or in person in your classroom. So I think the one thing for me is, we talk about engagement, is anything I can do in my classroom, I can find a way to do and simulate and find a way to make work in a virtual environment, or even asynchronously. It takes a little work, it takes a little time and effort to explore those tools and understand what that is. But the things that we do so well in our classroom, the personality that we bring to the classroom, right? The interactions that we bring with each other are really, really important. And I think that if we kind of go into everything with a mindset around that, then we're really set up for success. And then we can have a really authentic experience with the content, with the students, with each other. So then as we look at that, it's like, what are different types of engagement that we might have in a classroom? So Sean, you can go to the next slide. So when we roughly look at this, as we talk about this, I'm a biology teacher by trade, so I love Venn diagrams and comparing and contrasting and trying to visualize what it is that we're doing. So again, we have those student-to-student interactions, right? What are those course-related collaborations, interactions that we want to bring to the table? We've got some student-to-content interactions, right? And so how do we want to build that within the virtual environment or an online environment to supplement what we might still be doing face-to-face at this point in time? So we really want to be able to be intentional about how our students are interacting with that content, not just passively sitting by and watching it, not just passively listening to us talk, kind of like we are now, right? So what we're doing is a little bit passive, we're not going to lie. And so, but that's where we don't want to do that. We want to be able to engage with our students and have them engage with that content. And so Ashley's going to do a really nice job of talking about that in a formative way with some of the tools that we have. And this is the one that I'm most passionate about, is that student to instructor, that interaction that we can establish. And I think it's so critical, and I see some of you that are on camera, and I can see pets in the background. I can see the house in the background. And there's something to me that I've watched. My wife is a second grade teacher here in Westfield, and I just kind of watch what happens. It's a different type of conversation, and they get to know you in such a different way when they see you on video in real time with each other, whatever the case may be, right? Whatever that situation at home is, whatever they're doing, however they're coming to us to the classroom, which is virtual at that point, there's something really nice about being able to make that connection, right? So it's kind of like, if we're doing something virtually, like get cameras on and let's have that conversation, let's see the body language, because we read that and we react to that in the classroom. So let's read that and react to that virtually. And then there's a myriad of tools out there that would allow us to do that asynchronously, and then also to be able to do that like we're doing here in Zoom. So the biggest driver of success, in my opinion, what we're doing as educators really is driven by us. It's driven by the educator and how we interact with those students and what we bring to the table, that knowledge that we have, our expertise in planning, and all of those things that we do. So there's no substitute for what we can do. And to me, it doesn't matter the environment that we're in. If you're a good teacher in person, I have every belief that you can be a fantastic teacher virtually. And I have every confidence that you can be a good teacher asynchronously if you think about it in the same way. What am I trying to accomplish? How am I trying to interact? And what am I trying to get my students to do? And if you do that, I don't need to tell you the rest, because you already know how to plan for all of that. It's just, what are those tools that you can do and bring to the table to be able to talk about that? And I think that's what Ashley's going to talk about next.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. I would just really echo that anything you can do in the classroom, you can do in a virtual setting in some way. It might look a little different, but I think you can absolutely do it. So I'm just going to talk about something that's very similar to that with engagement, which is just the types of assessment. So I know that we all kind of know as teachers, but I'm really passionate about formative assessment. And so I'm going to get into a little bit more of formative assessment, and then I'll give you a lot of tools and ideas. As someone who's been to many webinars, I don't necessarily like a lot of theory as much as I like a lot of things that I can take from you. So I had we of course know there's two types of assessment, formative and summative. Had a wonderful mentor that told me that formative assessment is when the chef tastes the soup, and summative assessment is when the guest tastes the soup, which I really like that idea coming from the instructor perspective. So I think there's a difference, or not a difference, but it is hard to bridge theory and practice as a teacher. I don't mean completely, but in a lot of ways, it's very difficult. One thing I think is a really big difference is if I walked up to you and I said, or even a student walked up to you and said, is it okay if I like don't get it the first time? You would be like, yes, that's called learning, right? It's called learning if you like don't get it and then you think about it more and then you revise and then you expand and then you don't get it 14 times, but you get it the 15th time. That's called learning. And they would say, well, do I get like, I don't know, punished or are there consequences if I don't get it the first time? And you would say, oh my gosh, no, like I just want you to learn, right? And then practice says, one, we're teachers and we have 0 time. 2, we have to have some kind of consequences, right? We can't just like let you try again and not get it. We got to give you like grades, right? So there's all these like practical things that don't necessarily fit in to the fact that we want to allow students to fail and fail often, and that's okay. It teaches them a lot of different things, but it ultimately is like necessary in order to get to mastery. So that is where I think formative assessment lies. In that formative assessment is for learning. It is allowing failure to be okay. And it's using that formative assessment to go forward and continue the learning. And then we have summative assessment, which is just of the learning. So we are assessing, you know, we have now practiced in practice. I know where you are. And hopefully by the time you get to the summative assessment, I have nothing but confidence that all of my students are going to do fine. They're all going to do fine because I've done my due diligence. I have ensured through data that they have all mastered all that stuff. So that's kind of the end result. I think that formative data is how you adjust in the now, right? So responding and in person, that feels a lot easier because I can really gauge, okay, Sally over here seems to be, I don't know, facial expressions and different things I'm seeing on her paper, just like not quite there yet. This person over here, I can really gauge that easily. Virtually, it's just super hard. It's a whole different ballgame to try to gauge exactly where your students are in their understanding. Unless you assign something and then they get a big fat 0, right? Because you didn't realize that they were not with you at the time. So that's like in the now planning. There are ways to do that really well with virtual instruction that I'll show you in a second. And then summative is kind of the adjustment for the future. So the way I always think about it, and I guess it could differ, is just that once we look at the data from summative, we might decide things, all right, curriculum wise, maybe going forward, these are the things we tweak or adjust, or the way that we teach this, maybe we do that different after we see summative data results. Hopefully, like this little scale here, we have frequent, many formative assessments. That doesn't mean many things you have to create or many things you have to grade. It just means a lot of very small interactions with content where we can see exactly where they are. And then we have few summative assessments, and typically those are going to be traditional assessments. Typically, right? Papers, projects, tests, quizzes, things like that. So I just want to show you virtually what formative assessment could look like. So if you go to the next one, Sean. I know there's a lot here, but a lot of these can also be used in the classroom. And I know you've all used these in some way, probably at some point. But on the left are kind of the traditional formative assessments that are also easy to do virtually, right? And it depends on what grade level you teach. So you can adjust these either way. But just the virtual, I can pull up the screen. My students are on video. I have not yet taught high school virtually, but I would imagine I would be like, you better get on your video if that's even possible. So if we can see them on video, you say like stoplight, right? And they either red, yellow, or green, they hold up in their understanding. Same thing with 3, 2, 1, hold your fingers up. 3 is I completely get it, I'm with you. 2 is like, all right, I got a couple questions, but I'm mostly with you. And 1's like, I'm totally lost. So I can see really quick. Same with thumbs up, thumbs middle, thumbs down. And if chat is something that, you know, you can only see, then send me an emoji that expresses your understanding, right? And if you get a bunch of puke emojis, then you probably should maybe, you know, step back a little and ask questions and maybe and teach it a little differently. Same thing with group work. You always have breakout rooms with Zoom. There's a lot of different ways you can break out and have students go and really give peer feedback with each other so that they're getting some feedback. Practice quizzes are great. It just auto grades it on whether you're on Moodle or Canvas or Blackboard. You can put in auto feedback. So when they get something wrong, it tells them why it's wrong. So those things are really easily done. I would say practice quizzes are best when they're not worth anything. Research shows that, I think, contrary to what most people think about, well, if it's optional and it's not worth anything, students aren't going to do it. They also want a passing grade. They also want a good grade. And so I pretty much guarantee most students will do those optional things, and it'll make them better. Any low stakes assignments, right? Just write me a paragraph. Like, I don't need this whole huge worksheet that I have to grade at 8:30 at night. I just need do 2 math problems, and I'm gonna go and like do quick feedback. I like the next 2 specifically as a humanities teacher, but 3-2-1 summary is essentially, all right, we've gotten this topic, write me 3 sentences that either teaches it to me or summarizes, then write me 2 and then knock it down to 1. Give me 1 really good sentence. And the same thing with the sentence, phrase, word. So highlight the most important sentence in the article or whatever it is, highlight the most important phrase, highlight 1 word that you think is like the most important. Those things I think give you data, just even if it's really informal data, as to, all right, they're really pinpointing what's important here. Online forums and discussions, of course, in the virtual setting, Blackboard, Canvas, always are helpful with your participation, right? So you have to have some feedback there with students. Cold calling, some people are fans, some people are not, but that gives you some data. I would say there's an especially great thing about virtual where you can chat them individually. And so a lot of times you may chat individually as you're teaching or as students are answering and say, hey, I'm gonna ask you the next question, Johnny, or, you know, your turn is coming up, make sure you're focusing, so that they're really not upset by getting, you know, cold called or what have you. But you can still have those, you know, similar one-on-one interactions. And then things like journals and small drafts. We just want to do all of these things to ensure that students are allowed to fail and that we give lots of feedback and that we have lots of data in our head to ensure that when I give you that test, I already know, I already know what is going to happen because I've ensured that you are there before we give you this test. I want to give you some tools here on the right, sorry, and then I'll stop talking. There's so many cool tools. These are not tools that have to be used virtually, but they are tools that are great virtually, and there also a ton more out there. But these are kind of different ones, right? And they're all free. So you can always, like, you know, do the upgrades just like normal, but the free versions are totally fine and really useful. So if you're wanting like mind mapping, you want students to do creative things and trace like where their mind is at, Coggle is a really great one. I think Kahoot is you probably know about it. It's pretty popular, but it's still gamification and students love it, and you can do that virtually still. Edulastic, I just would really encourage that you check it out. It's super data centered and it's all ages. You can go and assign like specific standards, and then you can create, you know, assessments and then get a ton of data back, or they have all of these like thousands of pre-made assessments that you can just assign, gives you immediate data. There are like pre-made lessons with videos, super cool stuff. So I would say check that out. Edpuzzle is some interactive videos. So like Justin said, instead of, you know, having them watch something just passively, they have to interact with it and answer questions along the way. Padlet, of course, is like a court board kind of thing. So they're court boarding their ideas and their answers. Formative is pretty sweet. It's also like a real-time progress tracking. So they're constantly doing things and you're getting data. It's super easy to read though. It's not like a bunch of numbers. It's like green or red. And so you just see down the line where students are, green, red, or yellow. And it's in real time. So it's cool. Quizlet, of course, a study tool. It also has practice assessments and such. Flipgrid, you can really do some cool interactive video checks. Nearpod is super cool. It's got these full lessons already developed for you that are interactive virtually. And then of course you can always do Google Forms, right? Google Forms really easy as like a poll, especially anonymous. If you don't want students saying, I don't get it, because they don't want to admit that, it's anonymous to do a Google poll, right? So just a 1 question, 2 question Google poll, you can get that data immediately and then adjust your teaching along the way. Hopefully that was a little helpful. Sorry, that was a lot.
Okay, thanks, Ashley and Justin. Obviously, you can tell they're both excellent in what they do, both very enthusiastic people. My name is Sean Pennington. I'm the project director of K14 initiatives here at the college. Previously, I worked at the Department of Education. I was in the title grants and supports. Previous to that, I was a 4th and 5th grade teacher on the south side of Indianapolis for several years. Part of my managing of the GEAR grant, we have 5 projects that we are working through. The GEAR grant is funding that came out of the governor's office with the first round of federal funding through the CARES Act. For higher ed institutions, we had to focus solely on what was called Component 2, where we had to take the funding that was available. We had to apply to make use of that funding with either instructional or professional development resources. So something that's going to be available in the fall, I know as Mr. Elsesser already joked, this would have been very pertinent to have had this time a year ago at this webinar, but something that we're actively working to create and that we will have available in the fall is we're actually working with instructional designers such as Ashley and on Justin's team. We're going to create a K-12 virtual instruction faculty certification course. And what that is going to involve, it's not an all-encompassing list, but we're going to look at addressing topics such as getting started with virtual online instruction delivery, how do you structure a course, creating an online presence and environment, online assessments, how do you measure online learning, student engagement. Again, it's not an all-encompassing list of what could potentially be in that course, but look for that to be available this coming fall. It will be completely free to all educators statewide, K through 12. We're going to have considerations being made for K through 5 versus the 6 through 12. Myself being a former elementary school teacher, I understand that teaching a 9 and 10-year-old from a developmental standpoint is going to look a lot different than teaching a high schooler who's 14, 15, 16, especially in a virtual setting. Another cool thing on top of getting this instruction for free or this professional development course for free, you will also receive PGP points that you can use towards relicensure if you're towards the stage of where you have to reapply for your teaching license with the state. If that's something that interests you, something that you would like to do, that is another cool aspect and avenue of this virtual instruction faculty certification course. It has a very long title. And we're hoping to have that finished by August the 18th. That is the start of the fall term here at Ivy Tech. I communicate with Heidi regularly, so I will make sure that NPA that you are aware, all partners statewide, that you are aware when that is released and can start to be used. It will be used through our Ivy Learn LMS platform. Another one of our GEAR grant initiatives that we have here at the college, we have a readiness platform that I believe this was included in one of your Thursday newsletters, potentially a couple months ago. But Dr. Monroe, our provost, and Dr. Sue Elsterman, our president, this time last year, they were discussing with one another, what can we do for our statewide partners to help identify the COVID learning gap that has occurred, that will continue to occur at that point, and how do we provide a support? So once we identify that learning loss, identify that learning gap, what can we do at Ivy Tech to support all Hoosiers statewide in providing a resource that will help to lessen that gap, to provide equity and accessibility for all students, that once we've identified this learning loss caused from a pandemic, okay, what is a tool, what is a resource that we can provide to help students to become ready for college or ready in their high school courses. I understand some of us on the call, this might not be related to you. You might be an elementary person like I am or was, but this is specifically the content is for 8th through 12th grade. It says for 8th through 12th grade students, but the content is specifically 8th through 12th grade. Ed Ready is with our education provider NROC. It's called the NROC project. They help partner with us. It is what we use for knowledge assessment, or KA. For those of you in the audience that you have students that have to take KA before they can enroll or take a dual credit course, it is the exact same platform. Ed Ready is the readiness platform that NROC uses that is Common Core standard based. The Level Up version of that is Ivy Tech specific. And what we have done here at the college is we have taken all of those modules and we have transposed them and make sure that they are Indiana English Language Arts and Math standard specific. It is free for all students 8th through 12th grade, provided through our membership with NROC. There is no cost for any student to be involved in this. There are also free SAT preparation courses. If you're an adult learner, there are free task test preparation courses. And we have had several demonstrations with some MPA partners around the state, and you can use Level Up as a class prep tool or as an instructional support tool. It can be used as a summer bridge program. It can be used for summer school. It is not a standalone curriculum, and it should not be used individually as a class replacement. It is solely a learning, remediation, and readiness tool that is a supplement. I understand how pricey and expensive that a content provider, how expensive those licenses can be, how expensive that courseware can be. This is completely free. And teachers, you can have reports to identify the knowledge gaps, and then you can also have the ability to have students placed in modules that are specific to them to help fill that void or fill that learning gap. In comparative to if your school building, if you are using Cengage, McGraw-Hill, Pearson, whatever your content or whomever your content partner is, you pay for the single year license, and then after a year, where does the data go? It disappears. With NROC, with Level Up, that does not happen. The data is permanently housed with NROC. It is very secure from a student privacy and FERPA and COPA standpoint. There are a lot of regulations that go around collecting the data, so you don't have to worry about student privacy. But it is a cool thing to where, back in my experience as a 4th and 5th grade teacher, I would get 180 days of data on a student, and then I would get my new cohort of students, and you have to start over from scratch on a yearly basis. If you would prefer to use a product like Level Up, then what you could do is you could have this data on a year-to-year basis. You could have it in 8th grade, and then you could get a true snapshot of that student's proficiency development, 8th grade, 9th grade, all the way through high school. If you would like to learn more about Level Up, I've put the link here in the presentation. I know that Heidi is going to share the presentation with all of us. You can visit ivytech.edu/levelup, and you can look at our FAQ sheets and frequently asked questions, common information. There are some videos on the webpage. It is just a very useful tool that we're trying to communicate that it is being provided by us here at Ivy Tech to live up to our mission of trying to serve all Hoosiers equitably. Some of the content areas, we have math, basic algebra prep, algebra 1, algebra 2, geometry, pre-calc, trigonometry, and then reading language arts. Again, we've had demonstrations with several MPA partners thus far. If you would like a demonstration for your school, you can feel free to reach out to myself. Again, if you go to our Level Up webpage, you can fill out a request for information, and that will be sent to our team, and we can work with your school to identify that for you. Also in the presentation, if you click the Level Up link, it will take you straight to the platform itself. After you fill out the RFI link on the webpage, it will take you to the Level Up link itself. Again, it's free, 8th through 12th grade students. If you would like to get into the actual platform and see what it's like, unfortunately, you cannot avoid the diagnostic test. That is a very common question that we get. Do I have to click all the way through the diagnostic test? Yes, unfortunately you do, but it's a great opportunity to look at the different styles of questions that are asked. Again, it is an adaptive test, so each student that takes it, it will be different for each student. The experience will be individualized, and then it will place students, the program will place students in modules that are specific to them based on their learning needs. Try to be time cognizant, considering that we've got about 15 minutes left here. So we're going to move on to our practitioner panel. I believe that we have all of our practitioners with us. I'll let them introduce themselves. Andrea, we can start with you. If you can introduce yourself, and then we can, after Andrea is finished introducing herself, then we can move to Tammy and on down.
Hi, I'm Andrea Herm. I am a second grade teacher at Holy Trinity Catholic School in Jasper, and we took part in the e-learning, virtual learning last year, and a few weeks here, a couple weeks ago, we used the virtual learning for some snow days and things. So yeah, that's me. I've been teaching for about 18 years, and I'm in second grade.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tammy Reese, and I teach at the Christian Academy of Madison, which you can see on the screen. I teach first grade, and we were in the same boat with Andrea. Basically the same thing last year at the end of the year, and then off and on this year, including snow days. Those were virtual days for us.
Hi, I am Marisa Renwald, and I am the Director of Innovative Technology at Bishop Noll Institute in Hammond, Indiana. I also teach sophomore English and digital media and journalism. And we have been hybrid this entire school year with just, I think we had 2 breaks around Thanksgiving, and we took a week after Christmas off just to sort of prevent any eruptions in the building, but yeah, that's about it.
Okay. So appreciate their time, everyone's time today. So I've got a few questions.
We have one more. We have Josh as well.
Josh. I'm so sorry, Josh.
That's okay. I'm Josh Summermeyer. I'm assistant head of school up at Concordia Lutheran High School in Fort Wayne. We obviously went virtual with everybody else. Unlike our neighbors up here in Northeast Indiana, we were off for one day and then on Zoom on day 2 of March 14th-ish with all of our students. We had not done anything prior to that ever in virtual, so we really jumped right into it. And then have been in school in person for the most part this year. No hybrid and no full online option. We've had to go virtual a few times, obviously with the snow and whatnot, and then a few local COVID catastrophes that we've had here on campus that we've had to deal with, and also taking some break after Thanksgiving and Christmas. I heard that as well, as it's kind of a buffer. We did those as well. So
yeah, again, I apologize. I'm going to stop sharing. I've got some questions that we're going to ask the panel here. They did not see the questions beforehand, just to keep it organic, but I'll go ahead and stop share, so that way I know it's hard to try to participate in a panel if you can only see the screen's being shared and you can't see one another. So we can start off here, I guess, for our 4 panelists. What would you tell yourself, if we're thinking pre-COVID, about virtual instruction? If it was this time last year, what would you tell yourself either about preparing for virtual instruction or how to handle your transition to virtual instruction, if you had that opportunity to talk to yourself a year ago today? Or if there's anything that, even if it's just as simple as it'll be okay, we'll make it through.
I'll go first. I feel like we did a really great job when we transitioned. I mean, we were lucky to, in some extent, that we had a professional development day scheduled for the Monday after the Friday, that everybody pulled the plug on life, face-to-face life. And we took that day to show our teachers how to use Zoom, and then really focused on that first week. Put your standards and your curriculum aside. Kids were scared, families were scared. It was just reassuring to see your teacher on the other side. We told our teachers, look, just focus on making sure everybody's okay. And we also put structures in place right away. We were on a regular not a regular schedule. We had a schedule. It wasn't free for all. So we were face to face via Zoom every day with the kids. We did a reduced schedule in time, but they had to be online with teachers at certain times. There was nothing asynchronous about any of our classes. We went right into schedule, and we got a lot of positive feedback from families on that. And I guess the one thing, if I went back and had to do it over again, it would have been, I wish I'd have started teaching my teachers how to use Zoom prior to that. I mean, we had about a week's warning that we kind of feel it coming. And, we tested out a few different platforms and just settled in on Zoom. They started offering it for free to everyone, and we just jumped right in. That's the way it worked here at our place. So if anything, it would have been, like we have now, we'll have a Zoom license perpetually until someone takes it out of my dead icy grip. We'll just have it because it was the best solution at the time. Nothing else even held a candle to it. Google Meets was a train wreck. And I mean, Zoom was really where it landed, and then their brilliancy of giving it away to free to educators, that certainly has done well for their bottom line.
I'll follow up. I think at Bishop Knoll, we had a similar experience to Josh, where that week before everything shut down, we were meeting after school with our faculty and, running through everything, figuring out which platform we were using. We were also using Zoom. And we have a one-to-one program with our students. So we did have, e-learning days prior to that, once a month or so, but we were not teaching virtually. It was post something on Google Classroom, you're expected to do this. So if I was to go back, I would do, practice virtual learning from the beginning. Start with meeting with your students face to face over the computer, and not just get into that sort of, we call it the difference between e-learning and virtual learning is just posting something on Google Classroom rather than meeting with them over video chat, and also having a virtual lesson plan structure to your day.
I guess I can follow up by saying that one of the things that we discovered, maybe not at the beginning of last year, but when we started working our way into this year, knowing that there were going to be at least some weeks where we wouldn't be in school. One of the things that we put into practice, especially in elementary and lower elementary, our students do not have the technology. And a lot of their parents, some of them were doing it on their phone. And you can't do live instruction that way. And my first graders, their parents cannot sit with them for hours at a time and make sure they're on task. So we created slide decks, and in lower elementary, the slide deck might be 2 slides a day, and the slide would have like YouTube videos with instruction. They would have videos of me doing basic teaching. But we kept it simple so that no matter when that parent got home, they would have the time within a couple hours to work through that work. Some things kids, like if they were at a babysitter's, there were some worksheets they could do on their own, but we relied heavily on the slide decks, and the parents really liked that because then they didn't have to worry about figuring out how to get their children on a Zoom meet or a Google Meet when they weren't with the child at the time. And a lot of our families live out in the country, and their internet is sketchy at best. So they would, one child would be trying to do videos and the other child couldn't do anything. And they just get this cycle going of nothing loading. So that worked best for us. And then in the upper elementary, 4th and all the way up from there, they all had Chromebooks. So I'm not sure exactly what they did, but like upper elementary, like 2nd and 3rd grade, they also created slide decks, but they would have a slide for each subject and then a checklist. And there were a lot of, take pictures of this so that the teachers could keep up with them and make sure they were doing the work. And we would make phone calls if somebody wasn't showing up. And then we would try to do like Google Meets. Some of the teachers were able to do Google Meets at different times of the day where the kids would just start talking to each other. Not a lot academically got accomplished, but at least the kids could see each other and communicate with each other.
And ours was very similar. When we were different from most of you, it sounds like, in that March 12th came and we kind of had an inkling, like, is something going on? And then on March 13th, we got the afternoon for our assistants took our students so that we could plan. We had no prepping, we were not quite ready. And then after March 13th, we didn't see our kids again for the rest of the school year, but we did a lot of Zoom meetings as often as we could just to meet. Teaching second grade, we weren't going to get a lot of learning done at that point. They were just excited to share their pets and see their friends. But we used Google Slides. Our kindergarten, first and second grade all used Google Slides, and we did the slides per subject, just like Tammy had mentioned. And then our last slide was always, here's what you're going to need to turn in or send pictures of, or some of the things were electronic. We used Kahoot, we used Extra Math, we used Flipgrid, things that we could go back and check on. But it was all thrown together. But if I were to go back and talk to myself, I would tell myself to breathe and that these kids are going to be okay. It's going to be okay that they may not learn as much in the next 2 months as they normally would have. But they still learned a lot. And I'm very big on building relationships and keeping those relationships with my students. And, last day of school, they did a parade by my house. So we still were together, even though we weren't together. But I would tell myself it's going to be okay. And don't put so much pressure that they have to learn every single standard, but to just focus on getting them to do things. We even did one whole week of STEM slides. So our community here is pretty close together. And all of the second grade teachers delivered materials to every student's house. And every day of the last week of school, they had a different STEM activity to do, and we had provided those materials for them. And they all said that was their favorite thing because it was a hands-on learning that they had been missing for 2 months. It was the, experiment type thing. And that was something that I wish we could have done more of. So yeah, I guess that's what if I had to go back, I'd just say, don't put so much pressure. They're going to learn. Even when you think they may not, they will. We had the same instance, though. Some teachers wanted their kids working for their 8-hour school day, and it's just not possible with working parents. And so we all had to be flexible and just take it one day at a time.
Thanks everyone for those very thorough and thoughtful answers. My mom's been a teacher for a long time. I was not instructing during COVID, but talking with her, the impact that it had on her classroom with her students, and just being still in the education community. Cannot commend all of you enough for the work that you're still doing. On that note, what has been, for those you're teaching at different levels, or Josh at the administrator level, what has been your biggest area of growth from an instructional standpoint, or just as a teaching standpoint overall? Everyone was thrown into teaching virtually or e-learning. And I think that teachers are some of the best professionals on the planet, of constantly trying to develop themselves and become better practitioners at what they do. But what do you think, if you just had to pinpoint one thing that COVID has kind of forced upon you in terms of your growth as a teacher, I guess what would that, if you could pinpoint one thing? I know that's hard to do. If you can say, man, I'm really good at doing this X, Y, Z, or this has made me a much better communicator with parents, or it's made me a much better, regardless of what it is.
We had to create some systems. I mean, again, especially during the time where we were suddenly not together anymore, we had to create systems internally of how are we checking on kids. The traditional, we're going to stop by somebody's office doesn't work when no one's in their office. So we relied heavily on Google Docs and email internally, and creating checklists of kids. I mean, so like if we don't see somebody for a couple of Zoom classes, who, what, when, where is following up with them to make sure they're okay. I heard it several times from different people, put a lot of emphasis on relationship, and that we're seeing kids that they're looking at us. I mean, we evolved the whole Zoom thing, so it's not, we asked kids to get out of bed when they were Zooming. I mean, we asked them to be, presentable, not, dressed is the wrong word, but, be ready to learn. But the one thing was really coming up with new systems on the fly, not face to face, for the staff, especially, to collaborate on making sure we're checking up on kids. And how do you involve teachers in that? And then how do you clearly communicate that? Because what you don't want is, okay, we didn't see Johnny, and now 17 people are calling Johnny because we're a care and concern organization. And so everybody, reaches out and does it. Who's going to do that so it's not overwhelming some poor family with that kind of inundation of calls?
I would say that one thing I think I improved on, there were 5 of us who became Google certified teachers this year. After all of that happened, we became very familiar with using forms and sheets and all kinds of things that we went ahead and started figuring that out and got our Google certification. We're still not real good with classrooms because our K through 2nd grade is not one-to-one. And so the kids they're familiar with it, but they don't have access to it all the time. But I would say that's the one thing that made me improve my technology skills a little bit.
I would have to agree with Andrea. I'm telling you, I knew literally nothing about doing any of that online stuff. And I had to learn it from scratch. And basically a friend of mine and I spent the summer just learning how to use slide decks, learning how to make videos. That was all brand new to me. You can tell I'm not in my 30s anymore. And when I started teaching, nobody even had a computer on their desks. So, that was a challenge for me, but I've enjoyed it and I have learned a ton. So anything I can learn here is great.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and I'm just going to throw this out there, even from Ivy Tech's perspective. I mean, the same stories that you are all telling are exactly the same types of things that we had to deal with. And we like to think that we're okay at the online piece, but we found that so many of our teachers and our instructors, they weren't prepared for that, right? So all of these instructors who were so good and coming from industry and coming from different areas, right? They're not licensed teachers. They're experts in their subject matter and they're coming to teach for us, but the exact same effect, right? All of a sudden, all of these things we've been trying to tell them about technology and what it can do and why they should use our Canvas instance for their courses. All of a sudden, now we're gaining traction on all of these things that were really initiatives from long before COVID, because they realize the power and what it can actually do for their students. And so for us, that was a huge win. Now there's a lot of work to do around that as to how we kind of keep that momentum moving forward. But it was really nice to see that they latched onto that. Number one, they were able to persist through it and be successful with it for the most part, just as all of you are. And we were chatting while you were all talking that it's just amazing to see what all of you did through all of this. So, I mean, I can't clap loud enough because it's just amazing to watch and hear what you all have done and the way in which you've tackled this and met it head on.
From Bishop Knoll, I think I'll speak on behalf of all of our faculty, but we were one-to-one and most of our teachers were pretty well versed in the technology, and it wasn't such a big issue for us just getting into teaching online or airplaying or whatever in our hybrid classroom. But I think maybe our biggest growth was actually having really good virtual lessons and a good virtual lesson structure, because if you're not a great teacher in general, all of those issues you have are just going to be amplified when you're teaching digitally. And just simple things like filling the entire time that you have available, or timing what you have for student learning checks, or timing what you have for your bell ringer. Those are all things that have to be accounted for when you're teaching virtually. And that was something that you didn't think about beforehand. So that's where at this point, doing it almost 1 year, I feel like most of us are pretty confident with creating those digital or virtual lessons.
I had that quote written down here before you said it. It was written my piece of paper right here about technology amplifying the best and worst. Whether that is, I have a really good teacher who hates technology and I make him use it. Everybody knows how much they hate it, and that actually makes them a worse teacher. But if they're a bad teacher and you put technology in their hand, that is probably the worst combination ever. It just doesn't go well.
And Heidi, I've got I want to be respectful of everyone's times. I feel like, we could sit with this excellent panel and discuss. I don't want to ask only 2 questions. I've got a much larger list of questions, but we're already a little bit over time. If Heidi, I don't know if we'll ask one more question and then we can conclude our meeting. But I guess from our final take, how has this impacted your relationship with your communities, with your families, with your parents? Has this strengthened? I know that, that's very important as a former classroom teacher. And Tammy, I'm a native of Madison, so I'm very familiar with, the tight knit, the Madison relationship with all of the families. So I guess that would be my final question for the group, and then we conclude. But how has virtual teaching impacted your relationships with your families? How has this strengthened? Because while it's been very difficult, I think in some ways that COVID has also helped us build better relationships with one another.
One thing that we did at Bishop Knoll starting last spring that I thought was pretty useful was we would survey our parents periodically. I think we did it twice last spring, and then we did it once last semester, and we'll probably do it again once this semester as well. But we would ask them questions, even just like based on their mental health. We'd also survey the students to ask how they're doing, get feedback on how the teachers were doing, what more, activities they wanted to see. And the feedback we got was great. It was like 95% positive, and we would publish it online, so that we kind of wanted to show that we were being really candid about what we were doing. And especially when, we're in Northwest Indiana, so we had some of these public school academic giants like Munster and Crown Point, Lake Central, and they were even struggling a little bit and sort of reaching out to the private schools at that point to see what else they were doing that maybe their school systems were not. So that really worked for us. And I think that just the community appreciated it. The students appreciated it because they felt like their voices were being heard. The parents, obviously, if they're paying, X amount of dollars for tuition, we're very happy that they were able to chime in.
My parents have my phone number. I only have a small class. They have my phone number, and I told them, if you ever have a question or ever have a concern, and there were times when I had to get on the phone with parents and talk them through things, but we had good open communication. I would email if I felt that was necessary, but they let me know if, like sometimes I would add something extra, and I'd have parents that were very diligent about watching every video, doing everything I asked, and they would say, that extra thing you added just put us over the top. And I was talking to parents who were coming home from work at 5 o'clock at night and trying to do 3 or 4 hours of work with extra things I was adding. So, the parents appreciated the fact that, they'd apologize. I'm sorry. And I'm saying, nope, you be honest with me and tell me what's going on. Cause I can't, I don't have kids at home anymore. So I don't know what you're going through, and you need to be honest and tell me. And especially last year in the spring, I had at least 2 or 3 parents who were in the medical industry, and it was a very, very stressful time for them. And I had to keep that in mind because they were going through a lot where they were at.
Yeah, I kind of felt we did both. I mean, we built our community because we were all going through this pandemic together that no one had ever experienced before. But we also did feel a little distance since there wasn't any more high-fiving and hugging and being there with your elementary kids. And, those little kids really needed that. They were not seeing friends anymore, as well as high school kids too. But I felt like there was, of course, a distance with our community, but we are so lucky where we are. And our school works so closely with our public schools in Du Bois County that we're blessed in that way, because we all work together and we just want the best for all of our families and students. So we did a lot of things. We had a lot of drive-throughs, or, like I said, we did those Zoom meetings weekly, and I encouraged parents to get on there too, to say hi to everybody, because the parents weren't seeing each other either. So for them to get a little quick, hey, how you doing? Really, I think that helped. But again, like I said, like my class had a parade the last day of school, and it just made me feel like we made that bond stronger, even though we had to be farther apart. So I'd have to say it went both ways. I mean, we made it work, and we all had empathy for each other and what we were going through. But there were, of course, days where I felt like I'm never going to connect with these kids again. This is devastating. And then we had other days where it just felt great. It was fine. We all were connected, and having the community and parent support made a huge difference. We're really lucky that way.
I'd say, so from an administrative perspective, obviously I didn't have kids that I was dealing with on a regular basis, except for, chasing things down as necessary. But the, that connection we had, that the permission we gave, the further permission we gave for our teachers to try something, and if it blows up, it blows up. And then tomorrow you get back on, you continue to have a relationship with kids. We gained a lot of teacher and community support through the way we supported our teachers, especially early on. And then as we went on, I mean, that list of apps that was shown earlier, I mean, we were buying licensing for stuff because you could have 15-minute limit on something, and we continued a bunch of that stuff on this year. I mean, any crazy idea a teacher had to try to engage kids, we went after it. I mean, we funded it. We did PPP loans, so we didn't have to let people go. There was a ton of effort put in administratively to make sure the structure of school could be there so our teachers could support our kids. And that was seen. We did the surveys as well. We published the results. We had some central locations of things. So instead of doing a lot of things with written out messages, we did a lot of videos, especially as, every 2 weeks, we extended the closure for another couple of weeks. Our head of school, our principal would get on a video and we'd send it out to people, and they really appreciated just seeing that everyone's okay. That was a big piece of that. And like our groups, like teams would get together, virtually. We facilitated that all via Zoom, so that kids could still have connections outside of the classroom with each other. It was a huge thing, and our community, and the school community really supported it. I would love to say that was duplicated with our public schools, and they looked to us for resources. I mean, we had a lot of communication with them. The most communication we had with them was about the lunch program, and we were that went off famously here in Northeast Indiana. It was really great, and that was a way that people connected face to face a little bit. They knew they were going to show up at the local public school to pick up their lunches for the day at a certain time. You could at least connect that way. So there's a little bit of that kind of thing going on, but it really came down to trying to support teachers so they could support kids, and that was really seen as a positive by our community.
I think could not be more appreciative of everyone's time today and for your input. And I really think and hope that through this impact that has been created by the pandemic, that stakeholders, every single community, that they understand that the schools truly are the nucleus of every community, that they help shape the culture and the health of the community. Everything starts with the schools. So I think Heidi, John, I can turn it back over to you, but thanks everyone for your participation, your time today. It's after a long school day. You've got one more day till the weekend. Hopefully you can enjoy your weekends. And it's already March, believe it or not, a couple more months and then summer break, and then we'll start over again.
Thanks, Sean. Ashley, Sean, Justin, thank you so much. I appreciate this. And like I said, I've been excited about this partnership that we've had with IB Tech, and looking forward to even more things in the future. Appreciate our panelists and your participation. Like I said, it would have been great if we would have done it a year ago, but I continue to say there's silver linings in this COVID stuff, and that's because we've learned some stuff that we'll be carrying forward, even when COVID is, in our history books, which we hope is very soon. So I don't want to belabor people. Thanks so much, folks, for participating. Have a good day. Thank you, Ivy Tech. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.